I now want to bring in Professor Kobi Michael, Senior Research Fellow at the INSS and Mizgav Institute and former Deputy Director General in the Israeli Ministry of Strategic Affairs. Thank you so much for being with us on this breaking news. It seems the IDF has been active in Beirut, eliminating another Hezbollah commander. What do you make of the strategy? How is Israel doing so far in this escalation up north? Your thoughts?
Good afternoon. It looks that Israel continues with the same strategy that intends to signal to Hezbollah to be more serious around the negotiation table. I think that Israel still wants to avoid from expanding the war, but prepares itself in the very same time to be involved in such a war. And I think that Hezbollah is not convinced yet, and Israel has to do some further efforts, like the last attack that you have just mentioned. And I assume that if at the end of the day Hezbollah will not be convinced, we will find ourselves in an all-out war against Hezbollah. And I think that we are much closer to that today.
Stay with us, because I'd like to bring in a new voice to this exact discussion. Ahmad Sharawion, a research analyst from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, joins us now. So we are hearing about another targeted elimination in Beirut, a Hezbollah commander. Your sense of how this is likely to anger Hassan Nasrallah? What kind of reaction is likely to yet another airstrike in the capital right now? Your thoughts?
So this is a continuation of Israel's policy against Hezbollah since, let's say, last Friday. The targeting of Hezbollah's key leadership in Beirut's suburb of Dahiya, Hezbollah stronghold. How will it anger Hassan Nasrallah? So until now, we've seen retaliatory attacks targeting Kiryat Bialik, north of Haifa. They claim that they attacked an airport in Megiddo last night. So these retaliatory attacks have been, let's say, they haven't escalated into a full-scale war. The responses haven't been targeting huge population areas. Hassan Nasrallah previously has stated that a civilian casualty in Lebanon would equal a civilian casualty in Israel, but that is not the case. Hezbollah is targeting military infrastructure in Israel. They haven't tilted into targeting civilian areas yet. How that might change, the upcoming days will tell us, especially after the IDF announced a new operation last night or yesterday with 1,600 strikes against Hezbollah's infrastructure. But the situation is escalating day by day, and as your previous said, that we are getting closer to full-scale war.
And Professor, let me bring you back into exactly that. Clearly the most intense Israeli airstrike since the Second Lebanon War, and the IDF keeps launching its strikes on specific Hezbollah sites inside Lebanon. Your thoughts about a potential military operation likely in the coming days and weeks? How likely is that?
I assume that you mean a ground invasion.
Exactly.
I think that the IDF is prepared, not only with the ground invasion, but with more than ground invasion and aerial attacks, because Israel cannot afford itself to finish the war against Hezbollah, where there is still a military presence of Hezbollah in the strip between the Litani River in the north and the recognized international border in the south. By the way, this is eventually should be the outcome of Resolution 1701 of the Security Council from August 2006, but it was not realized or implemented even once since then. So Israel seeks to create a change from a second order, if I use the strategic jargon, which means a change of the system and not a change from the first order, which is a change in the existing system. And Israel still prefers to do it by reaching to a political diplomatic agreement, but Israel prepares itself to change the reality by military operation, a full-scale war, if it will not be realized by diplomatic initiative or agreement.
I want to bring in our correspondent, Robert Swift, because just a short while ago, we heard President Joe Biden at the UN General Assembly talking about the need for a diplomatic solution, but it seems that that ship has sailed, so to speak. Your thoughts on how this is likely to unfold?
I mean, even at the moment, we hear reports that the US is continuing to attempt diplomatic efforts. The US has clearly failed to prevent an escalation taking place on the Israel-Lebanese border, but what they are attempting to do, we're hearing, is using diplomatic means to pressure Israel not to go in on the ground. Your guess is as good as mine as to whether this will happen. I think throughout this war, we've frequently seen where Washington was essentially an observer, unable to implement its influence on the parties involved in this conflict. We saw Washington repeatedly tell Israel that it was against military operations inside Rafah in Gaza. The IDF went into Rafah nonetheless. We may see something similar happen here.
Ahmad Sharawi, I want to bring you in on your thoughts on the role that the US realistically could be playing here right now. As we've been saying, tensions clearly are escalating right now. What could Washington do at this juncture, exactly 6 weeks before voting day?
So the U.S. will keep pushing for a diplomatic solution. Again, President Biden's policy ever since October 7 was that he doesn't want the region to spark, or this to spark into a regional war. Unfortunately, day by day, we are moving towards that. And the U.S. will exhaust all means to reach that diplomatic solution. The question is whether this will satisfy Israel's security needs. Of course, the U.S. has been sending its envoy to Lebanon, Israel, Amos Hochstein, since October to find the solution. And as you can see, we are getting closer to a full-scale war in Lebanon, between Lebanon and Hezbollah. So, in terms of that, I think the diplomatic solution right now might not be the best, or might not be the most viable. Given the escalation. However, I don't see a change in U.S. policy. I see that the U.S. will remain consistent in its goal of reaching a diplomatic solution. The question is whether Israel will be willing to accept a solution that will not satisfy its security needs, and that is returning the displaced population into northern Israel.
And to that exact point, Professor Kobi Michael, tens of thousands of Israelis who've been living in the north have been evacuated now for more than 11 months, waiting until it's safe enough to go back home. That clearly is a long way off. Talk to us about the scenarios that could be unfolding through the prism of Iranian proxies, the Houthis still watching what is happening, militias in Iraq still watching what is happening. Talk to us about the potential threats across several fronts at once. Your thoughts?
I think that no government in Israel will be able to convince the dozens of thousands of Israeli citizens that were evacuated from their homes to return to their demolished homes if there will be a Hezbollah military presence near the border. And therefore, Israel, as I said before, must assure that at the end of the day, at the end of the war, there will be no Hezbollah military presence in the street between the border and the Litani River. And I think that with regard to the other part of your question, mentioning the other Iranian proxies, I think that the Americans are very wrong from the first day of the war, from October 7th. Instead of pressuring Iran and Qatar, the only two countries in the entire globe that can influence in this way or another Hamas and Hezbollah,
right,
they prefer to pressure Israel. They demand Israel to make further concessions, and eventually they tied the hands, or at least one hand, of Israel behind its back.
Right.
And I think that they are wrong in this regard. They have to turn the pressure to Iran, first of all.
Professor Kobi Michael, we need to leave it there. This conversation will continue. Thank you to you and to Ahmad Sharawi and correspondent Robert Swift.